So is this a reform movement, something that results in some kind of constitutional amendment, or is this a revolutionary movement?
I don't care. You can call it whatever you want. Words are our tools, unless we make them our masters. Most people have a practical streak, and they want to be able to believe that this kind of activity actually delivers results. And so that's, the burden on a movement is to show that.
We had our chance for reform, and that was Barack Obama. And that was the last chance for reform. Now, Occupy Wall Street, this is a revolution. Whether we know it or not, this is a revolution. Because we are tired of the people, the 1% of the 1%, and what they have done to the country, what they've done to the world. Government is finished. It's not going to work. I don't care who we vote for, who we put into office. They're bought and paid for before they get there. This is absolutely a revolution.
Really, for us, I think that we're breaking through the apathy. We're breaking through the cynicism. We're breaking through the sense that, you know what, we can trust the state or beg the state to make solutions for us. And if they don't make solutions, we're just going to keep gritting on. When we have massive unemployment in the streets of the Bronx and Brooklyn, and when we have more homes that are empty and owned by banks than we have homeless people, and we could actually house the millions of homeless people we have in this country, people, there is a sense that, if we had a little creativity and a little bit of drive, we could do it. Now we're at that point. We are not hopeless anymore. We're ready to fight.
The moment where there's a general awakening in society about certain realities of numerous situations we'll find ourselves in, specifically that we're creating a superclass. And I don't mean hierarchical superclass, but just in terms of magnitude of people involved, of common understanding of what's going on, and we're engaging the powers that be in coming up with a solution out of the crisis we find ourselves in. And the crisis is not just, confined to an economical crisis, but it's also a crisis of morals and it's a crisis of values. The big part of it is storytelling. Our ability to tell the story and propagate it to the greater world in various ways pretty much determines whether certain ideas survive or get buried under the onslaught of propaganda.
My name is Dennis. I made this movie, and there are a few things you should know about me right from the jump. I'm not an expert on the economy, climate change, or foreign policy. I'm also not an expert on sustainable farming systems, the history of social movements, or Legos. The Occupy movement has experts on all of those things and more, but I'm not really one of them. I'm a happily married husband, a father of 2 fantastic children. I live on a main street in a small New England town with actual white picket fences. I made this movie for you, me, and everyone we know in the hope that we can create a world where human need comes before corporate greed. So why does it feel almost un-American to say that? Think about it this way. Just go with me for a second here. You know that scene from the Oliver Stone film Wall Street when Gordon Gekko, played by Michael Douglas in a role that would win him an Oscar, appears at a shareholders meeting of a company, Teldar Paper, to defend his actions and his grotesque worldview, and delivers the now famous speech where he says,
"Greed, for lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. And greed, you mark my words, will not only save Teldar Paper, but that other malfunctioning corporation called the USA."
Audiences flipped out. They cheered. Everybody in the 80s wanted to be Gordon Gekko. But the thing is this, Oliver Stone wrote it as a piece of satire, but nobody got it. Just the opposite. While Oliver Stone was trying to send up the excesses of the Reagan era, Michael Douglas's portrayal helped inspire a whole generation of slick-back hairdos in double-breasted suits, adopting the greed is good ethos, and pursuing the American dream, as it had come to be defined, now delivers obscene wealth for a very few, while raining poverty and misery down on many, and serving as a homicidal force for others. Because people do, in fact, die for lack of access to health care in the richest country in the world. That's the US of A. Human consumption is, in fact, accelerating the destruction of our planet. People do, in fact, die in wars waged based on lies that profit a precious few. Over 5 million children globally each year do not reach their 5th birthday because they die of starvation. all of this is not because the system that puts man on the moon or can squeeze an entire library onto a computer chip the size of a thumbnail has failed to find a way to solve these problems. Rather, our system, without apology, places corporate greed above human need. And greed, to take back the popular phrase, is not good. Fuck you, Gordon Gekko. Now, the question many within the Occupy movement are trying to solve is this one. What would a world look like that had a culture and an economic system that places human need above corporate greed? And how do we bring that world into being? Who cares what it is called? Call it socialism, call it real democracy now, call it Chunky-Monkey-Cherry Garcia. The world needs to change radically, it needs to change dramatically, and it needs to change fast. This documentary is an invitation for you to participate in that positive change. Frankly, because we need you. Yes, you. I know, you're waiting to hear what our one demand is, right? Everyone wants to know, what are your demands? But the thing is this, we are our demands. Get it? Not you, not me, not some Darwinian race to the top of the mountain to collect the most trinkets before we shuffle off this mortal coil, but you, me, and everyone we know. Together, we are our demands. Not next quarter's profits, but people. We know we face challenges, but we think that we can collectively do better at solving the problems that face us than the solutions offered to us by politicians that have been bought and paid for by corporations and Wall Street interests. And we also know that you can't evict an idea whose time has come. Now, can I get a horn section, please?
gotten so bad, the wealth divide. It's a bad wealth divide, but makes it a problem that's easy to solve. All the money's in one place. And so all you got to do is go where the money is. Right. You know, you got 400 people that have the wealth of 154 million. You have 6 Walton heirs that have the wealth of 30% of American families. You have 1% with the wealth of 95% of Americans.
I would hope that for these people who are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, they will look around them and say there is something more important in life than the richest people becoming richer when we have the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. How can anybody be proud to say that I'm a multi-millionaire and I'm getting a huge tax break and 1/4 of the kids in this country is on food stamps? How do you be proud of that? I don't know.
There's never been a time. There's never been a time. There's never been a time as fucked up as this. As fucked up as this. I didn't fuck it up. You probably didn't fuck it up. But they, whoever they are, they fucked it up. Now it's fucked up.
Okay, so now that we've identified the problem, broadly speaking, what do you think the solution is? Raise your hand if you think the way our representative democracy currently functions, bought and sold as it is by Wall Street and super PACs, offers a bright ray of hope forward. Anyone? Anyone?
Politicians know if they outspend their competitor, they're going to win the election 94% of the time, okay? So they have no fear of the American people. They fear the people who are going to fund their campaigns.
Right. So that means that you, me, and just about everyone we know has very little say over who represents us and little to no influence over them once they get into office. The process is rigged to throw an enormous amount of money behind candidates in the 2 major parties, and consequently, choosing the lesser of 2 evils is something Americans have done with a fatalistic shrug of the shoulders for far too long. To say the U.S. government currently functions of, for, and by the people would be a funny joke if the joke were not on you, me, and almost everyone we know. Imagine a world in which your single voice carried as much weight as the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and you're starting to imagine the world that the Occupy movement is trying to bring into being.
We're not always going to agree. It's not about unanimity. We're going to be like a Duke Ellington jazz orchestra. Everybody got their own voice, and even Duke is not the conductor. He's just one voice among the others, but hit it, Gonzalez. Hit it, Johnny Hodges. Yes, that's democracy in action at the deepest level.
Experiencing the horizontal community and culture and organization was so radicalizing for people and continues to be so radicalizing because it draws such a stark contrast up against what they're fighting. And it actually, in their minds, clarifies what they're up against more than it would be clarified if somebody got up and tried to clarify it for them.
Thanks to Occupy Wall Street, there's a lot of new ways of organizing, which is not just calling people to participate in something you came up with, but giving people the opportunity to create themselves and to be part of the original brainstorming about what to do so that they feel empowered in this movement. It's also, I think, finally put the kibosh on let's organize a rally on a Saturday in Washington, D.C. when everything is closed and people come from around the country and spend a lot of money to walk around in a circle and then go home.
You've been here since day one. What's new about now?
I think now people are seeing what the government actually is. They're seeing the empire, what it actually stands for, and what you're seeing is all these repressive laws being passed and all these acts. NDAA, SOPA, HIPAA. People's mindsets are changing. People's mindsets are becoming much more, I guess what I can say is much more open to the fact that this government no longer represents the people, and the people are going to take this country back.
We're thinking about the poor and how to help them survive. And we're thinking about the homeless and how to get them a home. And we're thinking about single moms and how to help them survive. And we're thinking about people who wake up every day to bombs. And we're thinking maybe one day they could wake up to a gorgeous silence.
At 5:30 in the morning in Zuccotti on most mornings early in the Occupy Wall Street movement, there would only be about 50 to maybe 200 or so occupying the space. But at 5:30 in the morning, on the morning of October 14th, 2011, several thousand people were gathered there wide awake. Why? Because Mayor Mike Bloomberg had declared that his own personal army, his words, the NYPD constituting the 7th largest army in the world, would evict Occupy Wall Street. And these thousands were there not just in solidarity, they were there armed with an idea, some cardboard signs, and an urgency to protect the young movement. And many of them were prepared to go to jail trying to hold the space. I had already gone to jail once since all of this started. As an organizer with the October 2011 coalition, I had been in Washington, D.C. in the early days of the movement, and you can see me here after suggesting repeatedly, I admit, inside the Hart Senate office building, that we find other uses for the money we lavish on our homicidal bull in a geopolitical china shop of a foreign policy. I was given a do not pass go directly to jail card, and in a few days I would be arrested again. This time for protesting corporate personhood on the steps of the Supreme Court.
We're here to bear witness to be in solidarity with the Occupy movement all around the world because we love poor people, we love working people, and we want Martin Luther King Jr. to smile from the grave that we haven't forgotten.
Occupy DC, Occupy Wall Street, Occupy the Supreme Court, Occupy everywhere.
In my willingness to go to jail for the movement, though, I was hardly unique. And with the thousands that were in Zuccotti on the morning of October 14th, it seemed that we were about to eclipse the previous one-day record total of 700 protesters arrested on the Brooklyn Bridge. What was it that brought all of those people to Zuccotti that morning?
This may not be a revolution in the traditional sense, but this is a revolution of the mind, all right? This is a thought revolution, and it's not going to be stopped by police barricades and pepper spray, ankle sprains. And pepper spraying us is like throwing water on gremlins. The more you do it, the more of us fucking show up.
It's true. The movement did grow in the early stages because many of the arrests that occurred were the result of the borderline sadistic behavior of men with badges, guns, and pepper spray. And this police violence was met with a decidedly nonviolent response. In the first 6 months of the movement, about 7,000 people have been arrested in Occupy-related protests or events. Why all the fuss? And why, in the pre-dawn hours on that Friday in October, were so many prepared to go to jail?
When we were supposed to get cleaned out of the park, we swept the shit out of that park. And then we took brooms and we took them to Wall Street to go clean up Wall Street. I think most of the filth was in the offices, so we didn't get to it. But we did a little victory lap, and the police brutalized us and arrested a lot of people. But, you know, they do that, and they have done that for 225 years in this country, 235 years.
Nonviolent confrontations with the police, whether they be in asserting one's First Amendment rights to assemble or in unpermitted, spontaneous marches in the streets, can be incredibly empowering movement-building experience, an antidote to the years of disempowering and Orwellian free speech zones that had come to be the norm. And yet, civil resistance is but one part, one tactic of the movement. If you only saw the early stages of the Occupy movement through the lens of the mainstream media, you might think the movement was solely about clashes with the police.
And I can't speak, y'all want to shut me up. Why y'all treating people like this? This America! Why are y'all treating people like this? Why are y'all gearing up like this is war? This is not war! Let's go, folks. We can. This is not war! Why are y'all acting like this? Nobody has guns! There's no honor in hurting unarmed civilians. You get no respect. What did you see tonight that bothered you? I was here on October 5th. I saw them beating people. People that had nothing to do with anything, just grabbing people out of the crowd. There's no honor in that. My mom, my father, everybody has served in Iraq, Afghanistan war. I did 14 months in Iraq. My father was in Afghanistan. My mother did a year in Iraq. We fought for this country. I don't come home. I'm in New York City. I am from New York City, and these cops are hurting people that I fought to protect. There's no reason for this. There's no honor in hurting unarmed civilians.
Against police brutality! Against police brutality! And what are we here to tell them? Fight back! 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 Fight back!
Okay, let's just be honest here for a moment. For some people, this is, and justifiably so, a battle about a police state. Since 1980, the number of people in prison per capita in the United States has more than tripled. We now imprison a greater percentage of our population than any other country in the world. In fact, the United States, with only 5% of the world population, has 25% of the world's prison population. In the US, 1 in every 106 white males aged 18 or over is incarcerated. For Hispanic males, that number is 1 in 36. And 1 in 15 black males over 18 is currently in jail. Between 1987 and 2007, state spending on incarceration-related expenses increased 127%, while spending on higher education during that same period rose a mere 21%. Is it that much more profitable to jail our population than it is to educate it?
Stop and frisk, under which they stop, frisk more than 1,900 people each and every day, the New York Police Department does. 85% of them are black or Latino, and more than 92% of them were doing nothing wrong. We felt that we had to go at this illegal, unconstitutional, and racist policy. We put the call out, and we didn't know what was going to happen in response to it. But what happened was 35 people came up to present themselves for arrest to kick off this campaign of civil disobedience, and hundreds more came to stand in solidarity with us.
I think that's a great reason to stand there and lock arms and say, you know what, take me to jail. If you're going to continue to do this, I'd rather go to jail than watch you continue to put my brother or my sister or my aunt or my uncle or anybody else that looks like me in arrest. And I think it should be a scary thing, not just for those people of color or minority, but all of us to know that we have to live in a society like that.
Occupy Wall Street was just over a month old, an infant really, when this footage was shot. Deborah Sweet has been an organizer and a participant in this annual day of action against police brutality for the past 16 years, and with Occupy Wall Street marching in solidarity, this was among the most well-attended and, more importantly, the most diverse. Scanning the crowd, you'll see faces of people who don't fit the profile of someone who would be the victim of police brutality or of a stop and frisk. In other words, I see white people.
Well, the big difference, I would say, over the last month is that the ceiling on people's expectations of what could be done has really been lifted. People are no longer saying, oh, stay out all night on the streets. I could never do that, or you can't ever get people together. All the same old bullshit we've been hearing for years. And I feel that a lot of the work that's gone into these kind of protests over the years has brought about this day. Even the call to drive out the Bush regime because the world can't wait, which people people said, oh, that'll never happen, has fed into the collective consciousness, then maybe it is possible to really demand change on a huge scale.
Okay, so depending on your geographic location, your everyday reality may reflect the police state we live in to larger or smaller degrees, but at least you have your health, right? At least you have your home.
Good morning, my name is John Baker, Massachusetts, license number 2750, Bank Commissioner Cell Public today, November 8, 2011 at 11 a.m., property known as number 24 Illinois Street.
Mic check!
I'm going to read.
Mic check! Auction taking place right now!
Thank you.
Right in front of my camera!
Right in front of my camera! Thank you.
You're welcome, pal. Sometimes demanding change on a large scale has to start with small groups of individuals saying enough is enough, like this group of individuals in Worcester, Massachusetts, who gathered in an attempt to stop Bank of America from executing yet another foreclosure auction.
What do we do when the banks attack? Stand up, fight back! What do we do when the banks attack? Stand up, fight back! What do you do when the banks attack? Stand up, fight back! What do you do when the banks attack? Let's get out of here!
A lack of government regulations gave banks enough rope to operate like cowboys in the Wild West, and they responded by lassoing homeowners with these predatory lending practices. When the housing bubble burst, Bank of America got bailed out, and those with underwater mortgages were sold out so that CEOs like Brian Moynihan could collect a year-end bonus of over $9 million. Are we cool with that?
And they have enough money to pay for a reasonable mortgage at today's values. So this is something that all of Worcester can stand behind. We believe that when folks have, a home, that they should be able to stay in that home. And it's not like they're not willing to pay. This is the weirdest movement I've ever worked in, the anti-foreclosure movement, because we are begging people to take money and they won't take it.
Of course, Occupy hardly invented foreclosure defenses. People like Grace and anti-foreclosure organizations have been toiling away at this for years. But when Occupy Wall Street went to East New York in December to launch Occupy Our Homes, more and more people around the country started to realize that there was another way to take back control of their lives.
We're taking it back! We're taking it back! We're taking it back! We're taking it back! We're taking it back!
And sometimes demanding change on a large scale starts with even smaller groups. Dr. Margaret Flowers is among the nation's leading advocates for true healthcare reform that would eliminate the for-profit insurance companies and provide Medicare for all individuals in the United States. A former pediatrician and congressional fellow, Dr. Flowers worked within the system for years.
After the reform passed, I was traveling around the country and people kept saying, well, how are we going to get single payer? I was speaking around, various states, and it slowly kind of came together like, oh, well, unless, as a movement, even though we're in the majority of the population wants a single payer system, we're not going to be strong enough as a single issue kind of movement to have that kind of political power. Healthcare is really part of a broader social and economic justice movement anyway, and so we really need to come together, bring our strengths together, combine our strengths to have the power. And so I noticed in my talks I was starting to shift more into, calling for a broader movement.
As a core organizer of the October 2011 coalition that occupied Freedom Plaza in Washington, D.C., Dr. Flowers thought fit to attend, as an uninvited guest, a Wall Street Comes to Washington healthcare conference. I crashed the party with her, although they wouldn't let my big camera in, so I had to shoot the video of this impromptu meeting with the real death panels on my cell phone.
Wall Street needs to get out of healthcare now. We need a national healthcare system. This is unacceptable. Doctors are leaving practice because they can't provide quality medicine. I trained at Johns Hopkins Hospital. I was #1 in my class, and I can't practice medicine in this environment. Excuse me, take your hands off of me.
No,
take
you
your
need
hands
to
off
leave.
Me.
You are.
They need to leave. The real criminals are sitting at this table. The real criminals are the ones that are making money while people are dying. 2 million people in this country a year can't get cancer treatment. They have to choose between cancer treatment and sending their children to college. You should be ashamed. Every single one of you should be ashamed for what you're part of. If you're in here, you're with Wall Street. You should be outside with us
We got bounced but not arrested and joined protesters picketing outside where Adara Scarlett shared her story of why healthcare was literally a life and death issue.
I came here because in 2004, my father, Martin Ellis Goldstein, committed suicide. He shot himself in the head, and the reason that he did this was because he had a blood clot. He didn't have enough money to pay for health care, to take care of it, and he didn't want to pass the cost on to my sister and myself. He was 54 years old. This was the most considerate suicide I've ever heard of. He put sticky notes on everything he had borrowed from anybody saying, return this book to this person, and et cetera, et cetera. Everything that could have possibly been done, he did it. He even called 911 right before he shot himself and said, please come and collect my body so that my daughters will not have to find it. And he says, verbatim in his note, he says, I'm sure you understand that this was something I had to do. Getting old and ill without money is simply not an option in this country. That's why I'm here at this march, standing up for people like him. Every person that dies for lack of access to health care is somebody's father or son or daughter. And I'm here today to stand up not only for my father, but for all those like him who have names, who have families.
It's an injury to all. An injury to one is an injury to all. An injury to one is an injury to all. All power to the people. Thank you.
Okay, you think even though my mortgage is underwater and my healthcare costs are going through the roof, this here is America. I'll just pull myself up by the bootstraps and get to work. Nose to the grindstone will solve all ills. But be careful out there. If you haven't noticed, there is a war on workers well underway. Between 1980 and 2008, the average income of the bottom 90% remained effectively unchanged at $31,000 per year. In that same time span, the average income of the top 1% went from $400,000 to over $1.1 million per year. So much for trickle-down economics. In 1980, a CEO made 42 times that of an average employee. By 2010, CEOs were earning 343 times a worker's median wage. And while the rich got richer, they were paying less and less taxes. In 1945, millionaires paid a tax rate of 66%. In 2010, the millionaire's effective tax rate was 32%. If you're a corporation, things look even better. Bank of America holds over $2.2 trillion in assets and pays less in taxes than the average American household. In 2010, GE reported $5.2 billion in profit and was awarded a tax refund of $3.2 billion. Citigroup has not paid taxes in the last 4 years, and yet, in the wake of the financial crisis, they are deemed too big to fail and received $476 billion in taxpayer bailout money. And Goldman Sachs has spent $22 million in campaign contributions and $21 million in lobbying efforts in the past decade, and in 2008 paid taxes at a rate of, wait for it, 1%.
Enough is enough is enough is enough. We're not gonna take it anymore. No, we ain't gonna take it. We're not gonna take it anymore.
I never thought Americans could do this, and here we are in New York, finally voicing our opinion, and it feels so good.
But 1% got 81% of all the income growth in 25 years. That's nothing but greed, squeezing working people, rendering poor people invisible. How long did they think we would put up with it? We may have been born at night, but not last night. How long did they think we would be quiet? How long did they think we'd be complacent?
We've been down there, standing up for you and you, all the workers. These
Okay, full disclosure. I've got some real skin in the game when it comes to this anti-worker war on unions thing. My father is a CWA union leader and an assistant to the man I'm speaking with here, Vice President of CWA District 1, Chris Shelton. One of the groups CWA represents is Verizon workers. And as of June 2012, the Verizon workers he represents have been working without a contract for over a year. Except this round of contracts is different. Verizon is trying to break the union. Everything my father worked for his whole career could be gone within his lifetime.
So many diverse people from so many walks of life that recognize that we are the 99%. That at a time of record profits of Verizon is asking the very same people that have made them lucrative and a rich corporation that they now want to erode away our benefits. Unacceptable from my point of view.
Verizon should be the poster child for corporate greed because of all the money they make and what they're trying to do to us and everybody else at the bar.
They say it's about saving $1 million next year, but what do you think that this current negotiations is really about?
This current negotiation is about destroying our standard of living. This is corporations trying to get what they want that they've been trying to get for the last 25 years, and we cannot let them. And that's why Occupy Wall Street's message and our message are exactly the same. Corporate greed is destroying this country, and we cannot let it.
We have built very close ties with the communication workers. Before September 17th, we were already supporting the phone workers, and they responded by supporting us. We went to their last rally at the headquarters. They marched back to the park with us, and some of them slept there. They're going to be in a tough struggle. That's why we're getting this relationship with labor. Labor is relieved. I never expected, when I first started contacting unions, that the response would be so enthusiastic. But the labor movement has been kicked around now for quite a while, and they have to fight. And they see people fighting, and they see they're fighting the same enemy, and they see them reaching out. This movement has shown such an eagerness to reach out to the mainstream of the American public. And the unions represent the organized part of that. The focus on the 1%, and the first time in an American movement, I don't even think in the 30s, that the Communist Party did this in their mass work. I don't even think they identified the enemy as the ruling class.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Vice President, members of Congress, distinguished guests, and fellow Americans. Last month, I went to Andrews Air Force Base and welcomed home some of our last troops to serve in Iraq. Together, we offered a final proud salute to the colors under which more than 1 million of our fellow citizens fought, and several thousand gave their lives. We gather tonight knowing that this generation of heroes has made the United States safer and more respected around the world.
What's that? You too want to get a standing ovation from both Democrats and Republicans? Just feed them a lie that feeds the bottom line of the military-industrial complex, which just so happens to have embedded itself in every congressional district in the country. Nobody really believes that being the undisputed greatest purveyor of violence in the world actually makes us safer and more respected. I mean, come on. That kind of attitude is not going to earn anyone any Nobel Peace Prizes or anything.
Distinguished members of the Norwegian Nobel Committee, citizens of America, and citizens of the world. I receive this honor with deep gratitude and great humility.
George Orwell would have had a hard time coming up with this. Are we really this delusional? Let me rephrase that. Why were we attacked on 9/11 in the first place? Was it because religious radicals were upset that our female pop stars revealed too much décolletage? Or was 9/11 a retaliation for our imperial foreign policy? You see, the more honest we are with ourselves about exactly what our foreign policy is, the better chance we have to stop some of the truly horrific conditions it visits upon many of the people of the world. So say it with me. The U.S. foreign policy is a blowback-inducing homicidal bull in a cultural, religious, and geopolitical china shop.
The world didn't change on September 11th.
There was tragedy and a horrifying crime, a crime against humanity. Death for far too many people, and too many families left mourning, a city left destroyed. But it was not a world changing. It was not a threat to our country or our democracy. That happened on September 12th.
I served in Iraq in 2004 and 2006. I was in the second Battle of Fallujah, Al-Fajr in Fallujah in November of 2004. As a human being and as a person who has a heart, like I can't lie to myself or anybody else and say that we had a reason to be there, that there's a reason for the 1 million Iraqis that died and or the 5,000 troops that died. We say, oh, we're the greatest country in the world, but we go and kill, people in their country, but we don't stop genocides in Africa. We don't help people that we can help. That would be the greatest country in the world if we can save 1 million people instead of killing 1 million people.
If you're not convinced our foreign policy is morally bankrupt, perhaps we should talk about money. Taxpayers in the United States have paid $1.4 trillion for total war spending in Iraq and Afghanistan since 2001. Ever wondered what $1.4 trillion would buy? Well, it could pay the annual energy costs for every household in America for 5 years. But I hear you saying that would not do very much to decrease our dependence on foreign oil. Fair enough. $1.4 trillion could convert every home in America to 100% solar energy 5 times over. Or it could convert every home in America to 100% wind energy 9 times over. Or groceries for everyone in the country, free for 2 years. Or provide scholarships to every college student in America and award them a $5,500 grant 7 times over. Or turn all volunteer firefighters into full-time employees and pay them a full salary for 23 years. Or pay the full-time salaries of every public school teacher for the next 6 years. Instead, we took $1.4 trillion to pay a small black ops team to hunt, track, and kill Osama bin Laden. Oh, we even had money left over in the budget to decimate 2 countries, launch hostilities resulting in over 1 million innocent civilians dead and counting. Ask yourself, how many orphans going to bed with clenched fists tonight in Afghanistan or Iraq will grow up willing to fly a plane into a building? And how many trillions are we prepared to spend on avenging that future blowback? In the fall of 2011, a so-called super committee made up of 6 Democrats and 6 Republicans was charged with producing a recommendation that would have addressed the growing deficit. After 2 months, the super committee delivered the following terse and less than super public statement. Quote, after months of hard work and intense deliberations, we have come to the conclusion today that it will not be possible to make any bipartisan agreement available to the public before the committee's deadline. Before that frank declaration of legislative impotence, one member of the 99%, Leah Bolger, spoke for the rest of us.
The committee will be in order, please. Fix the deficit. And all this obfuscation with percentages of GDP, this is just trying to confuse the issue.
The chair wishes to remind all of our guests that
the public wants you to tax the rich in the wars. We spend more on
I would request that the Capitol Police restore order.
And this history of this vast, grotesque spending on wars and the war machine.
The committee shall recess until we are in order.
The base of this economy. We would have enough money for housing and health care and everything that we want if we stopped spending our money in this black hole of the military machine. It's very obvious. I speak to the 99% in the wars and tax the rich.
The fact that you can do everything right, go to school, and not just go to school, but excel in school, work really, really hard. And I graduated and really had the feeling a lot of the time, very consciously in my head, that I might as well not have. You know, I'm in debt now. Was there a reason for me to be in debt?
Good evening. Of all the time bombs in the American economy set to explode with dire consequences, this is a big one. Staggering debt from student loans. Everyone is told a college education is a way to get ahead. College tuitions, though, keep going up. So does the borrowing. And we just hit an awful milestone. Our nation's combined student loan debt has now hit $1 trillion. That averages out to $24,000 per student. It's now larger than credit card debt in this country, and it comes just as an entire generation is just starting out.
That a year ago, anybody would have predicted that on a cold, rainy day in November of 2011, you would have thousands and thousands of young people out on the streets in New York City and in cities across the country. Something has changed, and we journalists ought to be out here paying close attention to it.
Chance we have. We do it now, or we don't do it ever.
We're asking for an absolute security on Pell Grants so that all of our young people might be able to compete on a global stage with affordable education. It is horrific. It is a miscarriage of justice that there is, in fact, more student loan debt than there is credit card debt. We want every child in America not to be left behind, but to be able to compete in computers, in science, in math, in reading, and on a global stage. So we're not just here for ourselves, but we're here for our children. If you stand for our children, would you make some noise for that, please?
When Congress raises loan limits, schools respond to those increased loan limits by raising tuition because they think that students can afford to pay more because they're actually allowed more loan money. Nobody really has the option to expect to get a job, a comfortable job, and not go to college. We don't have an unskilled workforce anymore. For the workforce that we have right now, it's socially irresponsible not to go to school because the entire workforce is predicated on higher education. I think our education system hasn't caught up to our economy yet, and that's one of the problems, and that's where this problem is coming in. That's why people are speaking up. That's why I'm here. There are no bankruptcy protections for any student loans. This is the only loan in all of U.S. history that you can't ever default on. You can't ever discharge this with bankruptcy. The idea of the EDU debtors union is based on the labor union model and what they did effectively when our economy was very different, when there was so-called unskilled labor. They negotiated with the factories for better working conditions so that they could go back to work. Just that same way, the EDU debtors union could renegotiate a better contract or arrangement with our lenders so that we can repay our loans. It's employing an autonomous strategy of refusal. So you refuse to do something, you're saying no to something in favor of making things better.
Life as we know it. It's really about, do we believe in a better world than this? You know, can we imagine another world that is possible?
I just saw these effects that are so massive, whether it's BP, you know, dumping a bunch of oil in the ocean, or the tar sands, I think, are the size of Florida at this point in Alberta. I was really interested in the tar sands protests this summer because to see 1,000+ people getting arrested like that willfully was pretty amazing.
I've got a message to all of you today here. Is tar sands oil is unethical.
In order to get tar sands oil, you have to destroy the earth.
And so I think that, fine, stop the pipeline, but what happens after that? Another standoff with big oil? I think so. I don't think it's the environment's going to magically heal itself because we stop a pipeline. And the thing about the pipeline, and one reason that makes it so urgent, is that NASA scientist, James Hansen, who broke global warming originally a few decades back or whatever, says that the pipeline will be game over. Game over means uninhabitable Earth.
Have you ever had a conversation with a climate change denier? It's like talking to someone who just shot off their foot and not only denies that they are bleeding, but tries to get you to sign up for the National Rifle Association. I used to find it ironic that the quest for human knowledge that gave us nuclear weapons technology could be the thing to end the human race. But then irony returns served with a vengeance in the form of corporate greed and their enabling climate change deniers, whose head in the sand, willful ignorance has now created an almost 50-50 Vegas odds situation in which the question is whether we will end it all in a hailstorm of mushroom clouds and one final nuclear winter, or by turning the Earth into one big tanning salon bed with no off switch, slowly turning us all into something like raisins, drying in the sun, clinging to our deferred American dreams of consumption without consequence. 97% of climate scientists think global warming is significantly due to human activity. Despite this, 72% of news coverage includes a skeptic viewpoint or outright denies climate change. Therefore, 74% of people are either not convinced or flat out deny that human behavior is causing global warming. So, for the 74% of skeptics out there, let me ask, what makes more sense to you? Is it that environmental activists are spending their measly budgets in a global conspiracy with the 97% of the world's climate scientists to trick you out of driving your SUVs? Or do you think that Exxon, BP, and Chevron are spending their obscene profits bribing anyone with their handout and creating misleading ad campaigns to protect and expand their profits and limit their future criminal liability?
You look at, we are the 99%, and I saw some poster on Facebook of a college student saying, look, I've got dental health care, I've got health care, I'm educated, and I'm the 99%. We'll just go down to, Egyptian $2 a day living, and it's not even within, you can't say it's within their economy, it's talking like maybe you don't own a mattress within that economy, maybe you don't, blah, blah, blah. So the point is, distribution of wealth, where's that headed with no water, less and less water, global warming, food supply, energy supply, peak oil? What is that all going to look like?
Okay, we all have to cut back, live smaller, conserve. And when it comes to living small, perhaps nobody does it better than Sage Radachowski. Sage is a molecular biology researcher by day at Harvard and an active participant in, and while it was still standing, full-time resident of Occupy Boston.
I just have this in my blood. I build tiny houses on wheels, so I built a tiny house on wheels and brought it here. It's a bike trailer, and it sleeps me.
How do you stay warm in there?
Well, it's 2-inch thick, foil-faced styrofoam insulation, which has an R10 insulation value. And the top is 3 layers of poly, plastic, and the airspace is in between, because I need the light.
And materials for this, what did it cost you to make?
$100. It's a $100 house. Also, this could possibly be a home for homeless people. People who are experiencing homelessness could, if they want to, if they feel like it, have a little house that they park somewhere temporarily, because the shelter system has all kinds of issues with it.
We're dreamers, and in the movement, we're actually doing it. We are creating it as we go. And I think that until the people who are the naysayers come down, talk, and actually get involved, they're never going to understand it. They need to allow themselves to open up. We're opening ourselves to hear the criticism. We're opening ourselves to have the dialogue. And we want people to be able to open themselves up too. It's going to take time. We can't force it. But we're not going to let things get in our way because we see a better world. We have a vision for a better world. You know, there's this organization called the Center for the New American Dream. We're creating the new dream.
Starting today, Justice John Paul Stevens wrote in the 2010 dissenting opinion of the landmark Citizens United versus FEC Supreme Court case, the court's approach to the First Amendment will undoubtedly cripple the ability of ordinary citizens, Congress, and the states to adopt even limited measures to protect against corporate domination of the electoral process. Corporations with large war chests to deploy on electioneering may find democratically elected bodies more attuned to their interests. Corporations may find democratically elected bodies more attuned to their interests is a bit like saying to the residents of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the summer of 1945, this is going to hurt just a little bit, but don't worry, it'll be over in a flash.
The amount of energy throughout the country on this issue is phenomenal. I've been talking to Occupy organizers throughout the country. I developed a pretty solid network of organizers throughout the country, and I had sent out an email to a couple of thousand, occupiers saying, if we made a one focus on getting money out of politics, is this something you would support, or would you, be more interested in working on something else? And overwhelmingly, people said, yes, this is what we have to do. So just look at all the groups that have popped up that are focused on getting money out of politics, Overturning Citizens United is a necessary step, but it's a baby step.
In January of 2012, on the second anniversary of the Citizens United Supreme Court ruling, Occupy and Occupy allied groups converged from all over the country to begin those baby steps of overturning Citizens United.
It's time for an intervention, y'all. Have you ever seen that show, Intervention? At the end, they show you all this savvy stuff, and then they sit around with somebody who has issues and problems, and they talk about, how badly that person has done and what they're going to do if they don't change their behavior. And for us, we're dealing with folks who have a serious addiction to corporate money, don't you think? Now, we can't expect them to get off it on their own. They've been smoking that crack rock of corporate money for a minute. And crack rock can be very easily addictive. Somebody who was cool 6 years ago stuck up on the crack rock this time.
The Occupy movement has become a conduit to and a venue for talking about this corruption. And so folks like Move to Amend that are really, in my mind, setting the bar for the critique that corporations are not persons, money is property, not speech, and constitutional rights are for people only.
In 1856 in Dred Scott, this same Supreme Court said that people are property. Dred Scott affirmed slavery. In 2010, the Supreme Court said property is people. Both decisions are insane.
Spokesperson for the Move to Amend Coalition, a multiracial. Yeah, shut up! The Move to Amend Coalition is a multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition of groups, individuals, organizations coming together with a singular purpose: to demand, to win a constitutional amendment to make it clear corporations are not persons. They do not have inherent inalienable rights. And money is not political speech. And I want to be clear, the Move to Amend Coalition is committed to both doctrines must be abolished. We cannot overturn corporate personhood and still allow wealthy individuals to spend unlimited amounts of money in our elections. Are we right? Are you with us?
strive. Bees in the human hive trying to find something higher than what we're all mired in. Democracy? Monstrosity. Look around, it's a power monopoly. Have you noticed? People are like the stubble our society shapes. We get treated like refuse with the excuse that someone's got to lose for some corporation to win, as if it's not one world we all live in, you know, built on the backs of our poorest brothers. We've all forgotten the things we're all taught by our mothers. Share, care for the people out there, be they dark or pale, cool or square, bald or hairy as the monkeys we all evolved from. Add to the cauldron greed, arrogance, pride, vice. It'd be so much better if we just remembered that corporations are our creation. It is we, the people, who comprise this nation. Corporations are our creation. It is we, the people, who comprise this nation. Corporations are our creation. It is we, the people, who comprise this nation. Not free.
Realizing at the very least that the way our economic system currently runs is not democratic. It's not beneficial to the vast majority of people, and until we have some kind of economic democracy wherein the vast majority of people in their communities and in their workplaces have more decisions over what these corporations do, if we want to have corporations at all, then political democracy is a sham.
Just like we all pay a tax on necessities when we buy food and clothing and shelter, if you start to tax the purchase of stocks, bonds, and derivatives, suddenly you could solve the deficit problem in 2 years. And then you look at the military budget, the obscenity of the military budget, that the United States spends as much as the whole world combined at a time when our infrastructure is literally a D level grade according to the American Society of Civil Engineers. We get a D, and they say it threatens the future of our economy, that our infrastructure is falling apart. And so if you face up to those two issues, which are just wrong and unfair, the 1% and the military-industrial complex, suddenly we have solutions to all the issues we face. Suddenly there's money to invest in a new, green, sustainable economy. Suddenly there's money to reformat homes so they're not wasting energy. So you could turn roads into solar panels. That's all possible.
I've been really lucky in my life, and I have been able to get a great education, to have a job that I'm interested in, but I'm still here in all my free time, and I'm still working with these people so that everybody can get a fair shake. Everyone here has a story to tell about why they're here, and everybody has a different story to tell. But if you start to listen, you realize that it's connected to a few fundamental ways that the government and the economy are screwed up, and that they really are all connected, and that's what brings us here.
We have picked a fight with the most powerful interests on the planet. That can be a little frightening. As this movement grows, it will get more frightening. There will be a temptation to switch to smaller targets, like the person sitting next to you. After all, that is an easier fight to win. Let's treat each other as if we plan to work side by side for many, many years to come. Let's treat this beautiful movement as if it is the most important thing in the world, because it is. It really is.
They say that the Occupy movement's major victory to date is that we have changed the conversation, that people are now debating issues such as wealth inequality. At this point, I think we can all agree there is no debate. There is inequity when it comes to wealth. Period. Full stop. And it is growing. And the super rich are not super rich because of some force of nature, like summer morphing into fall, or heat always going to cold. They are super rich as a result of their active participation in, or their willingness to be accessories to, criminally rigged homicidal force of a system. What the Occupy movement has done, and why people armed with nothing more than an idea are being suppressed, often violently, is to acknowledge that so many issues are connected. Anti-war activists, or true healthcare reform advocates, or housing, or labor rights advocates, or banking reform advocates, you name it, are now all shining a light on the root cause of inequity. You see, our foreign policy does, in fact, limit our options when it comes to healthcare reform. A shareholder capitalism, one that demands growth every quarter, is directly contributing to the assault on collective bargaining issues. The American dream itself, the way it is understood by many as a myth of rags to riches, anyone could be a millionaire, greed is good, grab the most toys before you die ethos, should be euthanized for the greater good and the birth of a new American dream based on equity, sustainability, and the general welfare of the people should be brought into being. And by people, I mean people, not corporations.
I was out here during the day before inauguration. It was a Martin Luther King Day in 2009. People, total strangers, were hugging each other on the streets. We were having conversations across class and race lines. And all of a sudden we felt a hope. Well, some of us knew better, that there's no Messiah going to get elected by this system and deliver hope and change we could believe in.
So how will the Occupy movement that has wisely stayed away from promoting political parties or individual politicians navigate the minefield of the potentially co-opting force that is the presidential election cycle?
Now, this year is just going to be nuts. We've never seen this much money spent on a political process in the history of the world. And this comes at a time for a movement that is determinately opposed to this mad influx of money in politics. So it's going to be a really scary contrast. And the challenge of this movement is to create a counter-narrative, is to show that the justice of its cause is more interesting than anything these candidates can put on television.
I mentioned at the beginning that this movie is an invitation for you to join the Occupy movement, but there are no membership dues, no papers to sign. All that is required is the willingness to see the world as it is and decide that you are going to be part of the solution. Occupy is less of an organization and more of an organism, a living, breathing, multi-tentacled force that refuses to find a niche or be pushed into a corner. This organism is still a baby, and the narrative it will be telling in the years to come is yours to write. What's your alternative?
That's what it is, and it's not, the revolution's not gonna wait until after your Pilates lesson or your fucking hair appointment, Tommy Tucker titty tilt, all right? And the revolution may not be televised as Gil Scott Heron Dota, but it will be digitized and posted on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and everywhere real ideas are told, all right? So the revolution apologizes for shitting all over your apathy. Now pick a side.
Thanks, Lee. Couldn't have said it better myself. So when they say, why Occupy, what will your answer be?
First time in decades, people were really discussing, does the world have to be this way, and how could we bring a better world into being?
I think there's historical lessons involved here too, like the freedom fighters. They had to keep coming back and coming back, but they did that because they knew they were right, and they knew they could change the equation through actually putting something on the line.
Say, why occupy? 'Cause we
it's hard to ignore why she's crying the pain dry. There's bombs over her eyes, and every day another consequence, and every day another element that we throw away. Well, we're here to say we ain't gonna bottle our rage.
And they say, and they say, and they say, and they say, they say, this is just a movement, a new revolution, that's just how we do it. We not gonna skip upon it, ever stop, yo, we gonna let it pass to the next generation, 2012. They say, why we must occupy, the other people, they must all get up, stand up for your rights. And they say, why the jobs in these times, there is no jobs for people out of college and the vibes. They say, why we must occupy, and they say, why occupy, and they say, why we occupy. We gotta get up, stand up for your rights, yeah. And they say, why occupy, and they say, why occupy, and they say, why occupy, cause we can make it better if we open our eyes now. Get up, get up, get up, come on now, occupy, yeah. I like that. Last life, yeah. Get up, get up, get up, yeah. We're going downtown, I like that one. Get up, get up, get up, come on now, occupy, every day last life, come on. Get up, get up, get up, yeah, occupy, ain't I like no that compromise, yeah. And them I say, I want them off to say, play all the horns and then listen, okay. And them I say, what them really say, in the newspaper them I lie to way. And them I say, what them all I say, Fox News tell too much lies every day. And them I say, I want them off to say, cold it is the movement occupy what shit them say. Why we must act